One of the most important steps in doing your monthly budget routine is to close out your monthly budget. But why, if it's one of the most important steps and it's absolutely essential to your monthly budget routine, why is it so difficult? Why is it such a daunting task?
Hi, I'm Megan with Bethel Budgets. I'm here because it's more than just math. At some point, you've probably built a budget. You've laid out your income, you've laid out your expenses, and thought it's simple math. I'll just stick to what's on the paper. But then life happened and your budget didn't work out. The reason? Because it's more than just math. That's where I come in. Let's figure this out together. Don't give up. You've got this.
In this video, we are going to look at 3 things. 1, why is it essential to close out your monthly budget? 2, we're going to look at 3 reasons why the task can seem so daunting. And 3, I'm going to ask you 3 questions that you can ask yourself to help motivate you to get the job done. Why is it so essential to close out your budget? It's so essential to close out your budget because it's really the only way to make progress with your budget. If you don't look at what's been going on with your budget, you're just spinning your wheels over and over, creating a budget, and that you don't stick with maybe, or that there's all kinds of problems with, and then you just scrap it and start over. Every month you're scrapping it and starting over. And if you keep scrapping your budget every month and starting over, it's discouraging. You're never going to make progress. You're going to think that it's not working, and then you're going to give up and quit. And we don't want that. We want you to make progress. We want you to be able to use your monthly budget to make progress and meet your goals. The number 2 reason it's essential to close out your budget every month is because you need to answer these 3 questions. Are you over budget, under budget, or right on budget? You have to know how you did so that you can make progress towards your goals. You may be thinking that you're over budget and beating yourself up when in fact you are not over budget and you're doing okay. You may actually be under budget and have extra money to transfer to savings or pay off your debt and to reach your goals. But if you're not closing out your budget and you don't know that, that money's just sitting there and you're not applying it towards your goals, and that's a big problem. And 3, if you're right on budget, you need to know that too, because you need to be able to adjust your categories in the future. You could be taking those numbers that you're right on budget and think about what categories you could trim, or what categories you could add to, what categories you could take away, all of those adjustments that could be made that you're missing out on by not closing out on your budget. The 3rd reason that it's so essential to close out your budget is very closely related to number 2, where you're looking at whether you are over budget, under budget, or right on budget. You're going to look at those questions from number 2, and you're going to see whether you were over budget, under budget, or right on budget, and you're going to reassess. You're going to ask yourself, what went well? What could have gone better? And you're going to use that knowledge to refine your budget for next month. And you're going to use that knowledge to refine your budget for future years. When you're first learning to budget and you're first tackling your budget, give yourself some grace for the first 3 to 6 months. You're going to do that monthly budget, and it's going to be full of mistakes your first time. Then you're going to take that budget, you're going to close it out at the end of the month, and you're going to take that knowledge that you get from closing it out, and you're going to refine next month's budget. You're going to see, ooh, we overspent in that category. Was that because I didn't plan enough, or are we overspending? And so those are conversations you can have. If it was because you overspent, well, you're going to watch your spending better for next month. If you needed to assign more money to that category, then you can adjust accordingly for your next month's budget. And you're going to do that process over and over for 3 to 6 months until you really get that budget refined. The other thing is that things that pop up that were unplanned that you forgot about for that monthly budget, you can put in your calendar for next year so you're planning ahead. You can create sinking funds for those things so that also helps to refine your budget. Having a sinking fund for big expenses like insurance payments, Christmas is a great one. Anything that's over $100 that might mess up your monthly budget, you can create sinking funds for those and start squirreling away a little bit of money at a time for those so that doesn't have to come out of your monthly budget. So actually closing out your budget and looking at what happened that might have been unplanned that month, or categories that you were over budget or under budget on, helps you to refine your budget. And that's why it's so essential. If you're not following all of these things and looking at whether you're over budget, under budget, or right on budget, you're never going to make progress towards your goals. Next, we're going to look at why is it so daunting of a task. We've done our monthly budget. We've built our monthly budget. It's a zero-based budget. We may or may not have been tracking all month long. Then we get to the closeout. Why is it such a difficult task to do? Why is it so daunting that so many people are not completing this task? The number one reason it feels so daunting is because it requires that we have tracked our expenses all month long. If you've fallen behind on tracking your expenses all month long, that can feel quite daunting. Part of a healthy budget routine means that you are tracking your expenses regularly. I track mine daily. Some of my budget babes track theirs every weekend. They sit down and they track theirs for the whole week. I don't care what routine you do, so long as you're doing something regularly. That will help prevent that daunting feeling. If you wait until the end of the month and then have a whole month worth of transactions to do, of course that would feel daunting. That would feel daunting to me, and I love to budget. If you are struggling to budget and you have a month's worth of transactions to track, yes, that is absolutely daunting. The second reason that this task can feel so daunting is maybe it's just a reality that we don't want to face. If we're being really honest with ourselves, perhaps we know we've overspent in some categories, or we feel like we've overspent in some categories, and maybe we haven't been actually looking at the data or the evidence, and we're scared. We're scared to look and see how we actually did. Maybe because we feel like we've blown it, which I hate that word, blew my budget. I don't like that word. I feel like that's a hopeless statement. I prefer to say we overspent in this category or overspent in that category, because that feels a little bit more fixable. Saying I blew my budget is quite dramatic, but that is how we get to feel, and that is why it's so daunting to close out our budget. We feel like we blew it, and saying you blew it just implies it's blown up, it's done, it's toast, we can't fix it, it's too late. But we have to be able to go back and examine it to see where those problems were so we can fix them for next time. If it's either of those two, whether you feel like you might have blown it and you're scared to look, or you know that you've actually overspent in some categories and you don't know what you're gonna do about it, I've got you. I'm here for it. These are more than just math moments, and that's what I'm all about. Anybody can build a budget. It's just math, right? You lay out your income, you lay out your expenses, and you do the math, and it should all just work. But it doesn't, because there's life involved. And that's what I am here to help with, because life happens. That's why we have to go back and close out our budget. We have to be willing to face those mistakes, and that can be really hard sometimes to do on your own. But I'm here with you. And if you can get an accountability partner to do your budget with, or a group like we have our budget babes, and we do this together and we hold each other accountable and we sit with each other in these mistakes that we may have made, or we sit with each other while we close out our budget, and just there's strength and power in doing this together with someone. And I'll do this with you. I post mine online. You sit with me while I do my video and do yours. We'll do it together. I'm here for you. You've got this, you can do it. We'll do it together. The third reason it can feel so daunting is because we just know that it would be easier to just scrap the month and start all over. So there is a time and a place for scrapping your budget and starting over the next month. But the problem is that it can become routine. I have been there with people, and I have done it before too. I've had to scrap my budget. And I've been there with people that have had to scrap their budget and just start all over. But that needs to be saved for times that are really, really hard, like major traumas, major situations in your life that you are just literally in survival mode. For example, one of my other favorite budget channels to watch is Dear Debt, and Amy over there, she's just the sweetest, and I love watching her channel. Her sister passed away in May, and so she had to take some time off of her YouTube channel. And when you're dealing with that much life and that much grief, of course you're not going to be able to keep up with your budget. She even tried to go back and figure out what was going on with her May budget, and she just decided to scrap it, and she's going to start over in June. And that's okay. That is a very, very big circumstance and a very big time of survival. And that is one of those times where, yeah, you might have to scrap your budget and start over. So to be honest, sometimes it just feels easier to scrap your budget and to start over. But let me tell you, that is a lie. It is not easier. It's a lie because those problems that you're going to scrap and start over don't actually go away. If you're not in an extreme case of grief or survival mode, if this is just a monthly budget that got away from you and you're considering scrapping it and starting over, those problems don't go away. Those over budget, under budget, that doesn't go away. Your lack of tracking, that doesn't go away. That's just going to follow you to the next month, and it's going to perpetuate this problem of, I built a monthly budget and it didn't work out, but I don't know why and it's too hard, so I'm going to move on. That does not help you to meet your goals. That just perpetuates the problem, and eventually you're going to give up, and that's not good for you at all. So when you find yourself in a situation in which you want to scrap the whole thing and start over next month, there are 3 questions that I want you to ask yourself. The first one, and I want you to be really, really honest when you ask yourself this question, is how often have you felt like scrapping your budget and starting over this year? How often do you feel like that? Because that's going to tell you a lot. Really, what is your number? In the past 6 months this year, how often have you felt like scrapping your budget and starting over? That's going to be pretty telling. Look at the last year, the last 6 months. How often have you felt that way? Why are you feeling that way so often? What is part of the process that is getting messed up that's making you feel like this that often? What can you do about that? Who can you call in for help? Do you have an accountability partner? If you don't have an accountability partner, who could that be? Think about who you work with, who you go to school with, who you go to church with, who's your neighbor, who are you friends with? Who can you call in to help? Just to maybe they want to start budgeting with you. If you invite them into this process, maybe they'll sit with you and budget with you. Maybe they'll sit with you and close out budgets with you over coffee or over a glass of wine. Whatever it takes, maybe they'll sit with you and do that. That would be awesome. If not, maybe they'll be willing to meet with you and look at your budget. If not, maybe you can send it to them and they can look at it. Find somebody who would be willing to help you out in that way. So 1, again, be honest with yourself. How often have you felt like scrapping your budget and starting over? And what does that tell you about your budgeting routine? Number 2, I really want you to think about, is this actually impossible, or is it just really, really hard? So if you're thinking about scrapping your budget for this past month and starting over next month because it feels impossible, I want you to think about it. It may feel impossible, but is it actually impossible? Or is it just really, really hard? Can you actually not go back through your bank statements or your credit card statements and file away all those transactions into the right categories? Is that actually impossible? Or is it just going to take you a really long time? Is it going to be really hard to think back a whole month's worth of transactions? Can you access your other sources of income, your Venmo, your PayPal, your BioLife, your Tippy cards, all of those sources of income? Can you access them? Is that an actual impossibility, or is it just really, really hard and time consuming? Now, the other part of that is, if that is what's holding you back, can you make a plan for that for next month? So side note there with the Venmo, PayPal, Tippy, BioLife, all those extra sources of income, is that part of the problem that's making this feel impossible because your income is all over the place instead of being in one place? Are you doing a Transfer Tuesday? And if you're not, maybe you should be. Maybe that could help problem solve your lack of tracking that is preventing you from doing your monthly budget closeout. So maybe you've made the decision now that it's not actually impossible, but it might be really, really hard. Let me tell you, let me encourage you, you are capable of doing hard things. You've built a monthly budget. That was hard, but you did it, and you can do this monthly budget closeout. You are capable of doing the tracking of the transactions, and you are capable of doing this closeout. Dedicate yourself some time, this one time, to doing this nearly feeling impossible task, this really hard task. You're going to dedicate the time to tracking all of those transactions for this whole month. You're going to get this really hard task done, and then you're going to learn from it, and you're going to keep up with your budget for the next month so that this is not going to feel so impossible next month, and it's not even going to be so hard next month. You're going to be able to do this. You can do this. I know you can. You've got this. The third important question I want you to ask yourself before you scrap your budget and move on to next month is, what will you be missing out on discovering about your budget if you don't close it out? This goes back to those daunting questions. But what would you be missing out on discovering? And it's not just whether you were over budget or under budget or right on budget, but the behaviors that are in there, those more than just math moments that you're going to discover. So if I was sitting with you over a cup of coffee, because that's what I like to do, I like to take my budget babes out to coffee. Budget babes, if you don't know, is this budget support group I run in my town, and I take them to coffee and I get them set up with a budget and a debt digging plan and the savings plan and all of that. And so we get them all set up over the course of a couple cups of coffee. If I was sitting with you over a cup of coffee, I would ask this question and I would give lots of wait time and I would let you think through your answer. I would say, what are you missing out on discovering if you don't close out your budget? And I would give all the wait time in the world, and I would just sit there and I'd wait while you come up with an answer. But since this is YouTube and not an in-person conversation, I don't want you to click away from my video. We're gonna do this part together. The answers that come out of a conversation like this sometimes, and what you might discover when you're closing out your budget is, oh my gosh, we're eating all of our money. That's a big one. When I'm helping people to close out their budget and refine their budget and they're coming up with their budget problems, is they're eating all their money. They're spending too much money at the grocery store and they're dining out way too much. Typically it's dining out way too much. So they go, oh my gosh, we're eating all of our money. And the next would be if you have a spending problem in some other area. Maybe you are shopping too much. Maybe you're buying too many clothes. Clothing is another one that people are tending to overspend in. So that is a problem you may discover when you're closing out your budget. Another thing that you may discover is that you actually did better than you thought. You might actually be doing okay, but you're so scared of what you're going to discover. You may be thinking you're going to discover all of these problems and you may actually be doing okay, but you don't know. And you won't know until you close out your budget, until you do the hard work, not impossible, but the hard work of closing out your budget. What you're really going to miss out on discovering is your trends over time. Whatever trend you may have in your overspending or your underspending, you will see trends develop over time. Every month that you build a budget and close out your budget, you're going to see these trends. And those are important to note. And those are important to plan around and to adjust your budget for, and to notice so that you can reach your goals. These are the more than just math moments that I'm talking about. It's not just math. Budgeting is not just math. There's so much more to it. There's these behavioral trends over time that you have to capture by doing your monthly budget and your monthly budget closeout. So I have a story about one of my budget babes that was thinking about scrapping her budget and starting over for the next month. We were sitting around my table because I had a bunch of budget babes over to my house to do their monthly budget and their monthly budget closeout. And she hadn't been tracking her transactions. And she turned to me and she said, "Can't I just scrap this and start over for next month?" And so I knew that we had been having this problem. I knew that she had actually felt that way multiple times. So I asked her, I said, "How many times have you felt like that this past year?" Because she's been with me for probably about 6 months. She's probably been budgeting with me for about 6 months. So I asked her, how many times have you felt like that this year? Honestly, scrapping your budget and starting over. How often have you felt that way? And I just sat there and I let her think until she produced an answer. And it was quite often. I can't remember the number, but it was quite often. So then I asked her, I said, is it impossible for you to close out your budget this month, or is it just really hard and it's going to take a long time? Do you have access to your bank statements and your credit card statements? Do you have access to your Venmo and your PayPal? And so I asked her those questions, and I wasn't being mean about it. I said it in love, but I asked her those questions because I wanted her to think through it. Is this impossible, or is it just really hard? And so she thought about it, and she was She didn't really answer, but she just kind of thought about it for a minute. And there was lots of budget babes there, so we kind of got distracted on another part of the conversation. And then I came back and I said, what are you going to miss out on discovering if you don't close out this budget? So I asked her in real life all three of these questions in the same conversation. And again, there was no answer, but I could see the wheels turning, and her mind was moving, and she was really considering and really thinking about it. And then we all kind of moved on, and I didn't think that she was closing out her budget. I thought she was building her next month's budget. I didn't know what she was doing while she was sitting next to me, because we all sit and do our budgets together and close out together. There's lots of conversations. I did this month. What would you do about that? And we bounce things off of each other. But I wasn't aware that she was sitting next to me actually doing that hard work of closing out her budget. She sat there over the course of those couple hours and she tracked every transaction for an entire month, and she closed out that budget. I don't remember what month that was. I think it was her April budget. She closed out her April budget. And at the end of the night, she was the last one there. Everybody else had gone home, and she came and she said, I closed out my budget, and I still have an emergency fund, and I have money in sinking funds. So what she discovered was that she had done better than she thought. Yes, she had to do some transfers. She overspent in some categories, but she actually still had her emergency fund, and she still had sinking funds, which she was shocked about. She did not expect that, and it was such a pleasant surprise. And I was just so proud of her, because this is one, she had started her budget. She was barely making ends meet. I mean, her income was here and her bills were here, and if anything happened, she was in big trouble. And now she's worked over the past 6 months or so to build up that emergency fund, and she's got sinking funds. And even with the struggles that she's had, she still has an emergency fund, and she still has that sinking funds. And she wasn't going to know that. She wasn't going to leave with that positive outlook. She was going to leave still in fear and still beating herself up and still without an idea of what was happening with her budget. But because she sat there and she did that hard work, and it was hard. There's nothing fun about going through a month's worth of transactions, but it is doable, and she did it. And she left with an emergency fund and sinking funds. And I was so proud of her and so happy for her. So she got a big gold star in my gold star video, and it is doable. It is daunting sometimes, but it is doable. It's not impossible, and it is hard work, but you can do it. And it is so important. You have to know what you've done to make progress and get to where you want to go. So keep going. You've got this.